This is Aaron Edwards with Santos Springs. Welcome to this week's edition of the Friday Field Report South America. If you didn't watch last week's video, we had some good images. Well, not good, but we had some images of soybeans going bad in the field because of excessive rain. And we talked about that a little bit. And I got a little bit of feedback. I said, hey, the picture paints 1,000 words. I like it. But I would like to drill into the numbers. Is this an actual bullish story or is this a small amount? So in a lot of ways, today's video is almost like a part two on last week, mainly just because the primary driving story is still the rainfall. The old adage, rain makes grain, but if you have too much rain, if you have rain at critical times, it's not necessarily a good story. So is this a bullish story? Is it a bearish story? So rainfall coming out of Brazil, coming out of South America, that is the primary driver that could tip the scales on markets one way or another this week. And that's for both soybeans and corn. So that's what we're going to focus on. By way of just getting started, I want to go over the rainfall charts. Then we're going to look a little bit about the developmental phase of soybeans and implications that this weather has for soybeans, and we'll look at double crop corn progress. So that's, we're going to do weather, we're going to do crop development, and then wrap up with some, I would even call them guesstimates on whether there's a bullish or bearish story unfolding. So let's jump into it. So the first thing as we look at it, this is the past precipitation. This is rainfall from World Ag Weather. Yeah, there is World Ag Weather. This is rainfall from the past 7 days. We're focusing on kind of the Brazil more than Paraguay and Argentina. There's also rainfall there, but the problem of excessive rainfall is primarily in Brazil. The main takeaway that I want you to have from this map is basically all regions still got a lot of rain. And I'm going to draw, we're going to look at a few different areas because it's important. So let me see if I don't know which color is going to show up the best. We're going to try it here with yellow, see if that shows up. But this right here, this is the state of Mato Grosso. That's something you want to be watching for. Over here, there's 4 states that come together, and you really can't see it below the rain, but it's the Mato Piba region. I call that the Northeast Expansion region. These states, this is Paraguay, but right in here is this middle, that's Mato Grosso do Sul and Goiás, and then up in here you get Tocantins. That's kind of a central production region. And then you have southern Brazil down here with Paraná and Rio Grande do Sul. So those are kind of a few different regions. The main thing that I want to point out, those pictures that we saw, they were from the state of Mato Grosso. That's where I'm highlighting there on the screen. Really still a lot of rain. These colors, we're talking, depending on where you're at, 3 to 5 inches of rain would catch a lot of those areas over the last 7 days. A lot of rainfall. So wet conditions plus 3 inches of rain. And even if you go to the regions that aren't getting as much rain, I'm going to try to highlight Goiás right in here. And you're saying, well, that's not that bad right in there. Just remember that that's still about anywhere from 1/10 of an inch to 1/2 inch and maybe even over 1 inch of rain. So it's still quite a bit of rain and it's wet condition. The reason I highlighted Goiás is because we're going to go look. That is one of the places where double crop corn planting is the most delayed, but we'll get back to that later on in the video. It has been very wet. Even last week it was very wet. Now what's the forecast? And I think this is even more shocking than the past forecast. There's spots, this pink is over 6 inches of rain. 7-day forecast over 6 inches of rain. That's a tremendous amount of water. And the Northeast expansion area, again, let me try to get a marker up here. Black might show up okay here. Let's see, black. This Northeast expansion area, I mean, with what? At least 2.5, but most of the regions anywhere from 3 to 6 inches of rain. How much field work are you getting done if in the week you're getting 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of rain, right? That's that northeast expansion area. Basically all of eastern Mato Grosso, and there's a river that runs through here. So this is called the Vale do Araguaia, which is eastern Mato Grosso and Goiás. Man, just a tremendous amount of rain, 3 to 6 inches. That's a lot of rainfall. And then you go over, this is kind of the core of the heartland. Let me get another color to see if yellow shows up. Right here is the BR 158 corridor right up in there. Well, you're talking 2 to 3 inches of rain on the week. So it's already wet, plus another 3 inches of rain, 2 inches of rain. It's not going to dry up, right? That's a lot of rain. And then you get down to some of those other regions, similar story. There's a lot of rain forecasted this week. So it has been very wet. A week ago, we saw pictures of it's way too wet. Then we got a lot of rain last week, and there's even more rain coming. I just wanted to paint that picture. So how bullish is this story? While I still have the map up there, if we want, and a lot of times I kind of do this, right? You have to think of right around in here, you would have, if you draw an imaginary line, north of this is roughly, let me get another color. North of this is roughly 50% of South America's soybeans, and south of this is roughly 50%. Although this 50%, that's not all in Brazil. You'd have to throw in Paraguay, and then Argentina's over in here. We can see part of Argentina, and then southern Brazil, right? So if you'd split the soybean production regions in South America, roughly around that line, you'd get kind of half to the north, half to the south. Maybe you have to draw that line a little bit up. The other thing that while we still have the map that you need to be aware of is the double crop corn planting window. It basically, I'm gonna try to draw this chart, and this is, if you're familiar with Brazil, you know that what I'm gonna draw here is a very major simplification. I'm oversimplifying this tremendously, but we're gonna give it a go here anyways. At the risk of oversimplifying to the point that it's wrong, we're going to give it a go. So if you picture these as kind of windows, the optimal planting window in above these two red lines, so in this area up here, the optimal planting window for this would be roughly the 3rd week of February. The optimal here would be roughly the Brazilian side. So February 21st, this would be February 28th. And here, maybe you could get by in March. Here you're gonna be maybe March 10th would be okay as far as the optimal planting window for double crop corn. The takeaway, and again, I said it's oversimplified. The takeaway is as we move from north to south, that window is closing. It closes from north to south, basically. And now let's shift gears. We're gonna talk about soybeans, and then we're gonna talk about corn. As we talk about soybeans, the question was, okay, there's soybeans going bad in the pod. How big of an issue is it? Is this really a bullish story or not? Let me get a marker here. So first of all, what is impacted by that? So this 32% filling pods. Rain is good for that. This 10% flowering. Rain is good for that. So that area, if anything, 40% is benefited by it. And then you get over here, you have a little bit of late planted soybeans that are just getting started, but that's a very small part. And then you have roughly a quarter has already been harvested. So what's the vulnerable area? It's the area that is maturing and moving towards harvest. So at the most, the vulnerable area would be 29.2%. At most, we're talking 30%. And it's not all in one region. And we don't expect, at least at this time, a complete loss. It's very hard when you have those quality issues. How much is actually lost? Can you pick it wet and blend it? Can you, blend it with better beans? Can you let the rains go by and you'll have quality issues, but you can, adjust the moisture on it. Will it be used to feed locally to where, you couldn't sell the beans, but it also reduced demand for soybeans. So there's so many, it's such a fluid situation. It's tough to peg what percentage of the beans were lost. And so honestly, your guess is as good as mine, just from, in a situation like that, hey, maybe we can blend those beans. Maybe we can feed those beans. Maybe we can figure out a way to, wait a little bit. And some of them are past done. So some is going to be a complete loss, but what percentage of it is lost? And then the other thing you have to think about is, okay, let's say that there is a 20% yield loss on 30% of the crop. Wow, that's a big deal. But 2/3 of the crop are benefiting from yield from that. So even if, say, 30% of the yield is lost because you couldn't harvest it in time, what does that do for the balance of the yield? So all of those comments are, how big of a story is this? Well, there is widespread rainfall, and there's 1/3 of the beans that could be using some drier weather to get them over the finish line and get them picked. That said, is it a super bullish story? Probably not. And if it is a bullish story, it probably is a bullish story that rolls out slowly, just from how long until we adjust. Well, maybe a month from now or 2 months from now, they're like, I think that the losses to rainfall were actually bigger than expected. Or those fields, man, there's 3% of the fields that weren't even harvested at all. They just, are rotten. So is it a bullish story? Maybe, but it's too chaotic right now, in my opinion, to say that it for sure is a bullish story. It's just a really difficult situation. The other thing is, if it is to be a bullish story, at the extreme, if you can't harvest it and then, you got more beans coming in behind it, 40% of the beans haven't even gotten to that phase developmentally. So can it be a bullish story? Absolutely. If you just can't harvest the soybean crop, you can't harvest it. And what are you going to do about it? So it could still be somewhat of a train wreck. It could still be a very bullish story. Right now, I feel like just developmentally, it's mainly a jaw-dropping image more than anything else. And it probably sorted out to some extent. I'd put that, if you're looking at market tendencies, I'd put that on the back burner. It's hard to know how big of a story that actually is. Right now, I wouldn't place too much credibility on it as far as being a very bullish story. That said, let's shift gears to corn, because corn is a different situation. And I think we can already point to bullishness in the corn market. So as we look at this, you don't need to necessarily know the regions very well, but I'm going to highlight a few states that are just noteworthy. So this first one, this top one, Goiás, historically they would be 23, 20, a quarter of the way done. They should be a quarter of the way done. They're at 7% planted, and that is a region where, if you're generous with the planting window, you should be pretty close to being done by the end of February. Maybe you can sneak in the first week of March, but as March progresses, you are increasing risks of planting. If you were to think about it here in the US, maybe it's like June planting, where you might do great with some June planting, but you're feeling a little bit nervous. On the double crop corn, that's where that is. So how would you feel, just for that perspective? And on average here in the U.S. Corn Belt, I know some people are farming the Delta region or other parts, so it's a little bit different calendar. But if you just think about the typical Midwest area, how would you feel if it were the 20th of May and you're at 7% planted, and there is 4 or 5 inches of rainfall forecasted for the upcoming week. I mean, just picture that. That's how a lot of these farmers are feeling about their double crop corn. And they haven't picked, a lot of them, only a quarter of the beans are picked. So you're just, you're looking out the window, it's raining, everything's wet, and you're expecting another 5 inches of rain. And the calendar says May 20th. I know we're in February, but just for the analogy, how would you feel about that? That's how a lot of those guys are feeling right now. That's maybe a more dramatic case, but it's, in my opinion, with the weather forecast that we had, if you look at the state of Goiás, I think it's hard to expect that they will get to, it's almost impossible to expect with the forecasted rain, unless the forecast changes, they will not get 100% of their double crop corn planted within the window. So if it's too delayed, that maybe impacts acreage. And if it's only partially delayed, it very likely impacts yield, or at least the risk of yield. Because what you're fighting against is you have to, and I've said this probably every week for the last 2 or 3 weeks, you have to get it through pollination before the wet season ends, before the rainy season ends, before dry season starts up. So maybe that's probably is the most dramatic case. But let's look at the other ones. Just to the north of Goiás is Tocantins, and they're 7 percentage points behind. Again, that window closes north to south. So, man, you still have to plant 70% of your crop, and there is a lot of rain forecasted next week. Are you going to be able to plant it all within the window? That's going to be a tall order. Then let's look at Mato Grosso, the powerhouse. Okay, they're 50% planted instead of 58. That's better. That does help. But their optimal planting window in a lot of the state ends this weekend. So you're at 52% planted. There's anywhere from 2 to 4 inches of rain forecasted. You've got 40%, and the window is basically already shut. So do you continue planting delayed? I mean, how much can you get done? Like, could they get caught up? Yes, but it's a tough situation. And can you get acreage reduction? Yes, we still could. Can you get corn planting out of the window? Yes. So Mato Grosso is a state that they could maybe still make it up. Mato Grosso do Sul, they've got a long ways to go, but they usually are a little farther behind. So it's a tall order. On a national level, Brazil is 6.4% behind planting rate, which might not seem that dramatic, but you have to realize this is a double crop. So you're 6 percentage points behind, coming out of a wet week, coming into an even wetter week. So that delayed planting, it just seems like there's a decent shot that when we get next week's number and the number 2 weeks from now, it seems very reasonable that we'll see those delays continue close to 7% or even increase. And then you start getting 10% behind pace, pushing up against the end of the planting window. Can they really get the crops in? And it doesn't. Delayed planting is one potentially bullish story. The other potentially bullish story is, okay, they planted it, it was delayed, and there's plenty of rain, but what if that rain shuts off? So just because they get it planted, if it's delayed, there can still be a bullish story in upcoming months due to, will they get this crop in? If it's late planting, you have to get moisture through, you got to get moisture through pollination. So a lot to watch there. Today, with what we know today, I think that Brazil's double crop, I think that Brazil's corn crop should likely be reduced 3 to 5%. And so that would be somewhere between 5 and 10% on the double crop corn for the math to kind of work out. What's interesting is the CONAB's number is bigger than the USDA number by about that much. So Is it a bullish story? I think it should be a bullish story. If this is all that happens and they get caught up, you might have some people saying, well, the USDA already had more conservative numbers, so even if CONAB lowers their estimates, it's all pretty close and it's not going to change the global balance sheet that much. But if this story intensifies any little bit, I mean, we're right at that cutoff, another week, another 2 weeks of excessive rain, and I think it's going to be hard to say that there won't be some type of combination of reduced acreage and reduced yield out of the double crop. And double crop corn is 70 or 80% of Brazil's production. And even though the U.S. produces a tremendous amount more corn, when you look at the export numbers, when Brazil has extra corn, it hits the export market. So the global supply and demand is very sensitive to Brazil's production because of that. So it's definitely something to watch. Is it a bullish story on beans? I don't think so yet. Is it a bullish story on corn? I think it probably should be. I think the market maybe isn't giving this delayed corn planting story enough attention. And if you just look, well, they're 6 percentage points behind, but they still got time to plant. At that level, yeah, that's not that big a deal. But how are they pragmatically going to get the work done? How are you going to get it done? How are you going to get your crop planted on time? A lot of you probably remember 2019 excessive rainfall, right? So the market got real excited, but their excitement came late and lasted just a little bit, right? They should have gotten more excited earlier. But if I recall that year, the biggest rally was in June, so it was a little bit late. But farmers knew there was an issue 3 weeks before it rallied, 4 weeks before it rallied, right? At least 2. So it looks like we're moving towards a train wreck on Brazil's double crop corn planting. Unless something changes, I think there's a story that's going to be building there. Hope you have a great rest of your day, great rest of your weekend. Don't hesitate to reach out.